All right. Yeah. Stoked. I'm sitting down with Faith Jenkins, Jacob Esparza. How do I say it correctly? Help me.
Esparza.
Esparza. There it is. Yeah. Both individuals here up here in Reading in our environment. They've been through our school or going through our school currently. And we've bumped into these guys in one shape or fashion or another. Jacob, we were connecting a few years ago. He went out on, we've got some mentoring projects here in our community. Jacob was joining us in that venture. And Faith is currently going out with us into one of our outreaches into our city. We're going out into massage parlors, making connections in that sex for sale landscape, just bringing hope. And in the middle of connecting to these two, I just discovered a bit of their stories, and I feel like these guys have a lot to share as we're talking about family wholeness, family wellness, family dynamics. And why don't we just start there? Jacob, your experience, kind of a bit of your family history.
Yeah. So yeah, sorry, that was my wife.
Looks like you got some camera dynamics. That's cool.
Yeah, so I grew up in South Texas. I never knew my father. And my mother was in and out of my life. And so I was predominantly raised by my grandparents.
All right.
Yeah. And just kind of, they were just really tough, old school. So yeah, that's kind of like, we grew up really poor in South Texas. So just kind of typical Mexican home, just kind of hard work. And, our house wasn't like a house of, it was kind of mixed up because I grew up with a bunch of my cousins.
Okay.
And just like not a lot of affection, nothing like that. Just they were just hard work, stuff like that.
Yeah. Faith, how about you? Just brief family background story, your family history.
Yeah, so I grew up in a very, very small town in the middle of nowhere of Ohio.
Okay.
I was born into a crack house.
Okay.
And so I grew up there, and it was a lot of fighting, overdoses, drugs. There was parties, dealers coming in and out. Just a lot of not knowing what was happening. I had my mom there. My dad had left when I was younger, but she was very into addiction. And I had my grandpa and my 3 older brothers. And then one of her significant others lived with us as well. And so that's where I grew up.
How long were you in that sort of a setting before things shifted? Like, I think, I mean, we're going to get into that side of your story. You ended up in foster care, but how long were you in that sort of a setting until foster care became your reality?
Yeah, so I was there until 11 years old, until I was invited over to community member's house on Thanksgiving of 2012. And I was 11 when that happened.
All right. So now both of you, we'll start with Faith and go over to Jacob next. Like, just from those memories, and memories can be subjective things. Like we remember certain things, right? Certain ways. Just your recollection of what you learned in those family dynamics in terms of what is healthy, as well as what may not have been healthy.
Yeah. In my living circumstance of what family was growing up, I got a lot of the negatives.
Okay.
Definitely some of the negatives was I learned poverty mindset all the way to the core. Living in lack in practically every area of life is what I saw.
Yeah.
I learned trust was rare, and it was built on very unsteady things.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was quite a struggle growing up in those areas of learning that, but definitely some positives is that I did get to learn uh value for what I had.
Okay.
Um it was definitely a value. I became very thankful for my siblings,
Mm.
and yeah, I got a lot of vision, but through the hardships and stuff, it definitely uh it renewed my mind in a way that is definitely not kingdom.
Yeah. Yeah. I get you. But that, I mean, even now that you're able to like recognize what was positive there, that's beautiful. Like you don't take things for granted. And how about you, Jacob? Just like in your setting, things that you thought were healthy, you learned things that you might have picked up on that were like, well, that I don't know if that was healthy or
Yeah, so I guess, man, it was really like survival of the fittest sometimes, I guess, right when in my house. We had four boys there and my grandfather. Um, so I think for sure, like, the same thing as like just a poverty mindset. And
which how would you
just
describe that? Like when you guys say poverty mindset, what do you mean by that, Jacob?
so for me, I guess I felt like we would never get out of what we were in,
All
you
right.
know, um, like everyone I knew, everyone that I cared about, we were all really, really poor.
Yep.
And like, this is what our life was going to be like. There was no thinking outside the box. There was no pursuing education.
Sure.
There was no way out. And, and it's not that I thought that there was no way out. It just was in this is the way we all lived.
Yeah, that was your normal. Totally.
Yeah. Um, so like that for sure. And I guess for me, like another negative is that I grew up with my grandparents who loved me, but they never told me that they loved me,
Okay.
and so just like a lack of emotion and stuff like that. And but my grandmother, she was also a very hard worker, you know. So a thing that I got a value from her was like sacrifice and like sacrificing for your family and just hard work, just a hard work ethic.
Yeah.
I definitely attribute like my work ethic to her
That's
and the way
good.
she kind of led by example.
That's great. I love it. Yeah, shifting gears a little bit, like in those settings where, I mean, I think all of us would say, hey, family's never perfect. There's always lack. But I do think your guys' context, there's a unique level of like, whoa, it's pretty crazy. What did you guys start looking to, or did you look to other things outside of the family? Did you even know how to look outside the family to start getting your needs met? I mean, I think starting with you, Jacob, I know part of your story is you ended up in gang scenarios. Was there a natural draw, just that you didn't experience a level of whatever family could have been, should have been, would have been? Did you start finding that in gang activity, or talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so I didn't join the gang until I actually went to prison.
Okay.
But like for me, it was just like it's like friends in my neighborhood, and we
Yeah.
weren't necessarily, but like like my family, a lot of alcoholics in my family, and so I really turned to like I started drinking alcohol when I was like 12,
Okay.
smoking marijuana when I was like 12, and just really pushing towards drug use. And because I had no leadership in my life and stuff like that, like
Yeah.
no father figure. My grandfather was too busy doing his thing,
Yeah.
and so it's like I just turned to the older people in my neighborhood who sold drugs and stuff like that, and that's kind of the way like I felt like that they carried like respect and
Yeah.
yeah, it's just something that I admired, I guess, and
Yep.
that just kind of led me to using drugs, to selling drugs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um,
I love that. I mean, interesting. You use the word leadership. Like there wasn't leadership from the family. And so you were looking to others, and those others lived a certain way, and it just was natural to go the way they were going, huh?
yeah, for sure.
All right. So that's a dynamic. Like you're getting some of those needs met, but just outside the family. And anything you would speak to there? Faith? just in terms of like, hey, family wasn't working, so I started figuring out how to get my needs met elsewhere? Or because you're so young, maybe it's different at the time, because things didn't shift till you're still pretty young, like 11, right?
Yeah, I was pretty young at that age when all that was coming. So it was a case of very very powerless. It was that also became very instilled in me, is that I'm powerless to my surroundings. But
Wow.
a way that a lot of my needs became met was through friends.
Yep.
Because I was going to public school. I missed a lot of school, but yeah, public school friends was definitely a source. And then also due like to desperation, not only in me, but my family was drug dealers
All right.
as well. And so just
Okay. We got to say hello. Who's joining us here, Jacob? Who is this?
This is my daughter, Juniper.
Juniper. Hello, Juniper. I'm Lance, and that's Faith.
hi.
Sorry we interrupted you there, Faith, but we had to say hi to Juniper. So your parents were actually dealing drugs as well. So
yeah, so we would source from those drug dealers, and so that was a lot of times where I would get showers, food,
okay.
shelter at times, like heat, because there was a large portion of my childhood without any of those necessities of living.
Yeah. Wow.
And yeah, if it wasn't from dealers, it was from friends. And then if it really wasn't from them, we were trying to find some place in our close town to maybe like a charity.
Yeah.
And then also, since I had older brothers, like one of my older brothers would work like 2 or 3 jobs at a time to try and keep the walls from closing in, kind of.
Yeah. That sounds like super intense. Talk about in that period of time, like what's it like being a daughter in that setting? How do you take care of yourself? I mean, that just feels like a lot of chaos, a lot of neglect. Are you just kind of in tow with your parents? Like they're kind of dragging you around. So there's a measure of safety because you're connected to them. But like what are you doing to stay afloat and feel a measure of like, I'm okay?
So the Lord actually began to show me a lot of what that was just this past year.
Okay.
Due to trauma,
Mm.
there was a lot of brain capacity almost shut off due to it. And so
Yeah.
the Lord began to show me my past last year. And uh, uh, the main thing that kept me afloat was, since I was the youngest and I was the only girl, I would wake up and I was the hope. I was the love. And
Wow.
I felt like I was the only glue keeping my brothers from moving out, keeping my grandpa from leaving everybody, keeping my mom from overdosing, or even just leaving with a man for the
Sure.
rest of my life, and
Sure.
um, keeping her significant other there. And it felt like I had to be the glue to literally keep people alive around me.
Yeah.
And so that kind of became my role as a daughter, was that exact thing, because there was a lot of neglect, just closed out of a lot of doors to try and maybe protect my mind of figuring out what was happening. But since it was a lifestyle, it couldn't be hid. And so yeah, there was a lot of neglect and fatherlessness, and it was hard.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds extremely hard. Jacob, for you, like in your, like as you're starting to use drugs, running with dealers, I think you even said you were dealing yourself. What are you experiencing there? I mean, are you starting to get a measure of family? Are you learning how to get your needs met, or is it just like chaos land?
Yeah, it's definitely chaos land. Because I started getting into cocaine and stuff like that, and I really just I really just lost my mind.
Yeah.
I guess like I had no outlet because I grew up and I just really hated my mother, and I hated like just like my whole situation, and
Yep.
just full of rage and stuff.
Yep.
So being around certain people, like there's a value for that in the hood, you know.
Yeah.
So it's like if you're aggressive and if you violent, like people value that. So,
Yeah.
you know, I guess for me it was just like chaos, you know, just violence.
Mhm.
And it just I don't know if I getting maybe my needs met, but I felt like after thinking about it now, and I was really young, I was a teenager, and
Yep.
wanted to get approval, you know, like these guys respect me
Yep.
and stuff like that. But yeah, just really just chaos.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like every kind of ecosystem has a values base and things that create a sense of like, okay, you're in, you belong here. And in your case, it's like violence and aggression was validating. Like
Yeah.
it kind of brought you a sense of like, okay, I belong with this crew. And I'm just imagining, but anything you want to share here, I'm just imagining that like as you start getting into gang activity, that's only heightened, huh?
Oh, definitely.
Or they're deeper things you want to share about that even. Because again,
Yeah.
we're like why we're talking on this level is not to glorify any of that stuff, but really
Oh,
just to
yeah.
give understanding to people that may not have these kinds of backgrounds in their story. And we're just trying to
Yeah.
like bring people together and create a sense of like, okay, we understand each other to a degree instead of sitting back like, God, I don't even know what to say, you know?
Yeah. I definitely, because so uh, when I was 19, that's when I was sentenced to 35 years in prison. So that was at the almost like the height of my madness, I guess. And yeah, once I got it, and then I joined the prison gang and stuff like that. It was just, I mean, whatever I was going through, it seemed to like turned it up to 100 or something.
Yeah.
And you know, because in prison, it's like there's just so many people like you, and aggressive, violent, and it just really just turned it up for me. Even though I wasn't no longer even doing drugs, like my mindset, I became really institutionalized, and it just because prison is just like the strongest people are the most respected, and the most violent are even more respected.
Yeah.
And it just really just almost like justified like the way that I did my life, the way that I did my thing. And I honestly thought I was going to die in prison, so I never thought I was ever going to get out. So I completely engrossed myself into the prison lifestyle, into the prison gang, and I had no value outside of that, like for anything, not
Yeah.
for my family, nothing else like that.
Yeah. Well, you got to share here since we're talking about this. You got to share briefly the turning, like what happened
Yeah,
to get you out of that mindset and to bring you into a place of freedom.
yeah. So I mean, I never really, I didn't grow up a Christian.
Yeah.
We didn't go to church and nothing like that.
Yeah.
Even when I was incarcerated, I never, I don't know, I had no value for God. I didn't really hate God. I just didn't really, honestly, did not think he existed or whatever.
Sure.
So I was in for about almost 10 years. I was already locked up. I did a total of 13 years.
All right.
And so for 10 years, I was like involved in the gangs, just completely institutionalized.
Yeah.
Um, and at the darkest moment, I remember I actually got this whole tattoo on my arm. It's just full of death, this whole left arm.
Okay.
And right after I got this all done, I remember this guy invited me to a class called Faith 101. He just kept begging me to go. And yeah, I finally decided to go. And all of a sudden, this guy's preaching. His name is Pastor Abney. And I have like a tunnel vision experience. And God spoke to me. And he told me, he said, I'm always trying to speak to you. but you surrounded yourself with a worldly barrier. And if I surrounded myself with the world, that all I was going to hear was the world. But he's always trying to speak to me.
Wow.
And I didn't know God speaks to people. I didn't even know none of that. And I had he ended up being my best friend, Paul Lynn. I was his best man at his wedding recently. He was sitting next to me, and I was like, I think God just spoke to me. And he's read like all the Bethel books already, and he knows about. So he's like, oh, that's cool. You know, like if you tell somebody in this environment that like God spoke to me, they're like, man, that's awesome. But here I am, like I have no idea.
Yeah.
And ever since that moment on, I knew God was real. And like 2 weeks later, I ended up, we have our gang meeting. It's like 20 guys, 25 guys. And like up to this point, I'm like the craziest one in my little gang. And I remember I call everybody together and, excuse me, guys, she wants to be involved.
Yeah.
And I remember I tell everybody, I say, like, hey, I'm stepping away. I'm getting away from this gang stuff. And they're like, why? And I was like, well, God spoke to me and I can't ignore him. So that was August 9th, 2012, when God spoke to me, and my life was just completely radically changed from that moment on.
Wow.
I got away from the gang. So many things just started breaking off of me. It was just like always like that moment was like I always say it's like a cornerstone into whatever dam that I had built up. And like once that came out, it was just completely just overflow. Like everything just started crashing down.
Yeah. Wow. Come on.
Yeah.
Amazing. Back over to you, Faith. The transition into out of that chaos and out of that setting where drugs and very unstable. You said it started by you were just pursuing, like somebody in the community just was like, hey, you need to be with us. Like talk about that transition.
So so when I was 11, I have 3 older brothers. My next oldest, like just above me, he was in basketball.
All right.
And his basketball coach and wife started to realize that my brother Zach smelled just really bad. And so they started to offer him like showers, and like he's very, very scrawny, and so started like offering him dinners. And they ended up figuring out that he had a little sister because he wouldn't eat all of his food, and
Wow.
so I have to take it home. And
like he was
and
trying to
so
bring you food.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so so that was the connection with them. And so they ended up figuring out a little bit of our situation. The community really started like they had already known because I'm in public school, and so everybody knew about Faith's parents and like what was happening.
Okay.
But I think nobody actually knew an escape for that.
Sure.
And or like even a pathway out of it. And so they invited me to Thanksgiving of 2012, and that night I stayed with them. And it became very messy because my mom, she was still using, and she was very upset that her kids were staying at other people's houses.
Sure.
Me and my older brother also began to stay with that couple, and it was kind of off and on and messy. And then Child Protective Services really began to get called, and I started sitting down with my counselor at school, like the school counselor, and I would like tell her everything that was happening. They were calling the services, community members, like the basketball coach's friends. Everybody was getting in on it. And finally, my mom actually got evicted from our house that we lived in my whole life and moved to a different county. And so all the phone calls started randomly showing up to the next county, and they stepped in, and the community members got temporary custody just at because my mom was still alive, and but they put her on like a weekly drug test, and those kept failing. So like the visits were happening, but not really allowed to be back in the home. And then on October 16th of 2013, my mom overdosed. And so shortly after that, since I was already placed with a family, the courts just came together, and I wasn't very much involved with that part, but I know shortly after, my guardians ended up getting full guardianship over me.
Okay.
And so they've been my guardians ever since.
Okay. So you've been in the same home since then, like in terms of a foster parent or a guardian, it's the same individual.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. What a beautiful story. Talk about that transition a bit, like just the journey from something so unstable to a whole new environment. I don't know what the environment was like. I'm sure it was more stable than what you were used to. Was it pretty natural to receive their love and to fold in? Was there like a fight? Were you fighting against their love? I don't know. I mean, again, we're trying to learn.
So for me, it was very challenging, and as heard in the foster system and in children, like we always hear about those challenges, but we don't quite know what they end up being.
Yeah.
And a piece of that is a lot of those kids, including myself, have no clue how to process the pain that we're going through.
Okay.
And we're coming out of unstable homes, which definitely they're not teaching us how to properly process what's happening because they themselves are in a traumatic situation. And so for me, I was in the 5th grade, and kind of when things started getting moving, I had mentioned that I was sitting down with my school counselor. And as a little girl, my whole life has been crying, neglected, always like wanting her mom, wanting a dad in her life. And I'm sitting here in a crossroads of so badly I want stability and my needs met and to live, like, because it a lot of times it felt life or death. And so I'm sitting at this crossroad of wanting all those things, but also wanting my mom and wanting my dad. And I'm sitting here talking to a counselor, knowing that they're connected with the cops. And in my eyes, the way that my mental pathways are strong towards cops is not great, because all I've seen is them take my mom away, take my dad away, take my brother away. And that's the one thing that I fought for my whole life, is to have them. And so, yeah, it was very challenging because I was in that crossroads, and I know what I was saying would get my mom in trouble.
Yeah.
And so that alone was very, very hard, and a lot of unknowing, because since Child Protective Services was jumped in, there was a time and a place where my school let me have different locations of drop-offs. Because my mom was moving, then we had our other house, and then I had my guardians now. And then I also had a friend. And so in this transition, I had no consistency at all.
Yeah.
And I never knew where I was going. There was times where I just stayed at the school because I was so scared and like almost powerless to the fact of I have no control over my life.
Sure.
And I don't know what to do.
And then as that changed, like, did it just take time to receive that love, to settle into that stability or security? I mean, I'm imagining it's a journey. Like it was a process. Yeah.
It was definitely a process, and I'll say even now it's still just tilling up those soils and stuff. Jesus has came in and he continues to give me vision, but yeah, when I went into the home, it was very surface level, and so there was a lot of good clicks, and but as time went, we started to figure out how broken my thought processes were. And I mean, I had like 6 articles of clothing, and I was totally okay with that. And they came in with all these clothes to provide for me. And I would stay wearing my old clothes because it was that fact of, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to fully pursue this.
Yeah.
Like, is this going to stay because my mom was still alive in those beginning pieces?
Sure.
And so it was quite different. And then as like my mom passed away, it was that transition of, oh, I put my roots down now. Like, this is going to be my new family. And it was years of processing of how do I even communicate to them, because I didn't have a mom I could communicate, and my dad was never there. And so there was a lot of conversations of, quite honestly, I don't know how to speak to you, or what do I come to you with, and pretty much how do I be a daughter.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, receiving the love was quite challenging and very new.
Yeah. How about for you, Jacob? Like that transition, you're stepping away from gang life and the violence and everything that was quote unquote your reality, learning to follow God, let God in. How did love and your ability to relate to others start to get influenced? And did it take, I'm assuming this all takes time. Like you don't just get it snap, or maybe you did.
Yeah, well, so I remember the first book that I read, a Christian book, was Supernatural Ways of Royalty.
Okay.
And I remember I was praying and I said, oh, God, I want to be this kind of Christian. And I had then they ended up starting a BSSM school inside the prison that I was at.
Okay.
And I became a part of that. But I also had 2 mentors, Jeff Hale and Paul Lynn. And they had been Christians, their whole life and stuff like that. And they discipled me, they walked with me, they taught me so much things, loved me throughout my failures and my faults. And I just, honestly, like I felt like, the Holy Spirit, when the Holy Spirit came, I invited into my heart. I never said like a salvation prayer or anything like that.
Yeah.
God spoke to me and I just gave him my life. And whenever the Holy Spirit, I never had conviction before.
Yeah.
So whenever I started feeling conviction for things that I would do or say, it was just completely foreign to me. And being incarcerated, like I was surrounded with nothing but men. And so, but the way I used to think was like, if any man would come up to me and be nice to me, I assumed that they were like homosexuals or something.
Yeah.
So like learning to be like intimate or be vulnerable with a bunch of men was super hard for me.
Sure.
But like luckily for my mentors, I call like my spiritual fathers, they really just walked with me this thing and showed me how to like just to love well. And once I started doing that, I became a leader inside of the school, and I just started discipling other men and taking them through the same process of what I was taking through. So like I did
sorry to interrupt you, but I want to just explore something there. Would you say you were pulling on those mentors? Like,
100%.
Like you said they did a great job of discipling me, but it sounds like you did a good job of saying, hey, I need input. Like, what did that look like? What did saying, hey, I mean, was it just inquisitiveness, or was it like, man, I've got real gaps, pain? What do you guys do about this? Yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure. I would definitely, because so I was so wrapped up in my identity in the gang life, and
Yeah.
I remember I was telling my friend, I was reading the scripture, and this is actually my Bible from prison. I
Wow.
carry this. I'd carry this with me everywhere I went,
Wow.
and so I remember I read the scripture about, as a dog returns to his vomit or something, like, so full to his folly. And I remember telling Jeff, I was like, oh man, I don't know why, but I feel like when I see my homeboys, my ex homeboys, my ex gang member friends, like I feel like, oh, that vomit almost looks like satisfying, and
Yeah.
I want to go back to it.
Yeah.
And and he would just like hear me out through all these struggles that I had with father. I didn't know my family really well,
Yeah.
and but yeah, they were soup, because Jeff was very intelligent man, and with all my questions in scripture and stuff, like I had so many questions, and I would always just go to these guys, hey, what does this mean? What does this mean? What does
Yeah.
this mean? And they really just were patient with me and answered my questions. But I definitely drew on them, like as best as I could in the beginning. But then as I matured, I actually was like, I really found like transparency and intimacy with these men to be
Yeah.
of huge value.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, even that statement, like being drawn back to your homeboys, it was like, well, why? Well, because there were needs being met there. Like there was an exchange, huh?
Yeah,
So
definitely.
you had to like display, you had to like exchange that the
Yeah, because I
connection.
think,
You had to find a
yeah,
new connection, man.
yeah, for sure. Because I mean, because whenever we're in this gang together, it's like I'm going to sacrifice myself for you, and I know you're going to do it for me.
Yeah.
And so it's like we were in this together,
Yeah.
and so when I became a Christian, it's just like I had to find out, like, it wasn't about like necessarily fighting, like
Yeah.
that it was just like not physically fighting, but actually fighting for each other in a different kind of way.
Yeah.
And I learned like the value of that, like Jeff and my mentors bringing me into their family because I didn't have one. And
Yeah.
his mother would start visiting me, and it just showed me a new way of fighting for each other.
Well, and I was going to say, isn't that a picture of family? Like we fight for each other, we make sacrifices for each other. But when our family dynamics are super fractured and broken, it's like untethered. There isn't a connection. It's every man for himself, every girl for herself. And yet healthy family is like, no, like we're here. Like doesn't matter what's going on, but like we're just here for each other. So even faith, you're talking about learning a new way where somebody's committed to your well-being, and it was a process. It was challenging. It didn't even compute at times. You were like, what is this that's happening? But it sounds like over time, like healing it was being achieved. Anything that you would share there, Faith, in terms of how some of what you had to navigate as a young girl is impacting the way you're doing relationships now? And again, I know you've just probably learned a ton.
Yeah, so and even with that, I just met Jesus just about 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And so there's like two huge shifts of my family growing up, shifting into the family I lived in, and then shifting into like kingdom family
Yeah.
and those different pieces. But I can agree with Jacob growing up in just like with him in the gang, just because I was involved with dealers and different stuff, a lot of the mindset gets to you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah.
Like, because that's just it. Like because there's that piece of family that like wasn't there, that there was so much destruction, but when people would show up threatening to kill us, it was like, you got to do what you got to do to keep your people safe.
Totally.
And so even when I was shifting into my guardian's family, it was after like they gathered trust, and I actually realized like this is safe. Like they
Mm,
actually aren't wanting anything from me. Like I don't have to be their hope and their love like my past family.
wow.
It became this factor of um there's still that learning aspect of like kind of like what Jacob said, is learning a new way of family. But
Mm,
that was definitely a huge positive of me almost like leaving and cleaving to a new family of
mm,
I'm gonna do what I gotta do to like keep my people. And it was definitely uprooting a lot of rocks in my soil to make that into a healthier
mm,
aspect of family. And then even receiving Christ in my life 3 years ago,
mm.
it's still that process of finding that healthy family.
Yeah.
But I gotta say, like knowing the devotion of what family is and then partnering that with kingdom has been absolutely insane.
So let's talk about that. Both of you, like what you're, I mean, Jacob, you have a wife. I'm not sure if you have more than one child. I know I met one of your kids. Do you have others too?
Yeah, we just had a baby 3 months ago,
Yeah. So
baby girl.
you're in a stage of life where you're starting your own family now, and faith not there yet, but still you can speak to this. Your guys' ideas and concept of what family could be, should be. And again, we're not like judging people when we talk about should be. We're just saying like, yeah, these are things that we've experienced in terms of what family really could be or could look like. What's your insight? How about we'll start with Faith and then go over to Jacob. As you've been in the family scenario you've been in for a while now, Faith, like what would you say to me who's looking to be a good dad and a good husband? Like what does it take to do good family?
I like I said before, is definitely devotion.
Okay.
um Devotion something, but it comes with the fact of like accountability,
Mm,
love, and I'd say intimacy, like love partnered with intimacy where you actually can see into each other
yeah,
is something so core. Yeah, building that trust and
beautiful.
having each other's back,
Yeah,
um and but not afraid to have that healthy confrontation.
yeah,
That's something that I'm learning currently with family. And just that fact of Jacob had mentioned it earlier, is like transparency and intimacy
yeah,
is so powerful.
yeah,
And it brings that freedom, it brings the openness, and actually it like bonds, like it brings like that healthy bond.
yeah,
Instead of like you do what you got to do, it
yeah.
brings a healthy bond of like accountability and kingdom involved.
It's beautiful.
And yeah, and I'm learning that now in my relationships, and how to help like be healthy in relationships with friend, with a boyfriend, with
Yeah,
family, and like bring that in from my family. And then also, since getting vision with Jesus, being able to pick up what I've learned through all the families I've been involved with
mm,
through my childhood too.
yeah. It's beautiful. I love it. Jacob, anything you'd add there? There's some real nuggets coming from Faith right there. I mean,
Yeah, for sure.
that's gold. And I love
Yeah.
that you use the word devotion, Faith. What a beautiful word. I haven't heard that said yet. Yeah, anything you would add there, Jacob? Your idea of healthy family?
Yeah, for sure. I kind of always say one of my best advice from Chris Valentin had said one time. He said, "I'm gonna save your marriage to the men." He said, "I'm sorry," and it's kind of joking, but it's like also just admitting, like, whenever I said something stupid or something like that. But yeah, for me, I felt like the same thing was off with me and my wife. We have great communication, and we talk about things, even hard things, because when we did the Love After Marriage course, whenever we did first year of school, and it was just very heartbreaking to see like a lot of couples that hadn't even, like hadn't had sex or haven't even talked in years.
Wow.
It was always over like one little thing. And
Wow.
so we kind of made a commitment to each other to like say, we're never going to let that one little thing divide us. And no matter how awkward it was, how awkward it is, how uncomfortable or scary it is, we're always made a commitment to always talk about it. And for sure. And I would just like to say that, to anybody who like coming from my past or something like that, like always look for what God is going to use from your past and like use it for good. Because say like, the way that I grew up, and I started thinking, I wanted to always completely discredit everything from the past. I wanted to always disconnect myself from that. But then I feel like I'm losing like some fruit from it, because like everything that I stood for before, like standing up, I would never back down. I fought for the things that I cared about. And now it's like those things are replaced in a different kind of way, like to my devotion to my family. And even though I'm not using my fists or anything like that, it's just like anything tries to come against me or my family, like I will stand against it. Like any evil against people that I love, it like brings that thing up in me where like I want to fight for it, and I'm gonna fight for it. And so I would just say, like, to just anybody, don't discredit the things that happened in the past that maybe they weren't good at that time, but whenever God comes in and steps in, he redeems it. And like, don't discredit your warrior spirit. Don't discredit your fighting self. Like embrace that part of you, but don't use your fist. Use your spirit, use your words, and fight against the things that the enemy tries to bring against you. So, because like God can redeem anything. I'm married, and I have two beautiful little girls. My life is full, man, and I think again, I would just say communication. That's like one of the biggest things that me and my wife that keep us healthy is that we talk.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, I love what you guys are saying. Faith, just that dynamic of authenticity, vulnerability. I think that's a really big deal, isn't it? Like that people get to see us for who we are, and that's where trust is developed. Sometimes we can like slip into trying to put on a face or trying to do the right thing, and what happens when we're weak? What happens when we're not strong? What happens when we don't have the answers? Can you still stay connected? Can you still communicate when you're not doing good, right? That is a big deal. Anything from either regarding like what you would want people to know out here, and like general, like the bigger land is stuff that you guys have passed through and walked through. Anything that you'd like us to know so that we can stay connected, and sometimes again back to that, like we want to build bridges through these conversations. Faith?
I'd say, yeah, just like what me and Jacob keeps saying, like that aspect of intimacy.
Yeah.
Because there's a big part of, especially when you're coming for those traumatic situations, like they know, like there's a piece in them that it's all they know, but there's a piece in them that they know it's not right, but they don't know that there's actually accessible other ways of living. And so just creating that place where they can become known, because it's such a hidden world, like just tucked away almost. And I gotta say that's something that has transformed my life, is becoming known and letting people come into me. And that's one of my biggest things with me and Jesus, is he's shown me the garden and where Adam and Eve were like fully known. And the second that they ate from that fruit, they became hidden, and that shame came. And so in my life, I've worked through so much shame, and the Lord showed me, like, when I actually use my voice, become in, like, let somebody see into me that's safe,
Yeah.
and those things, it actually shreds away those fig leaves that Adam and Eve covered themselves with.
Yeah.
And then they're no longer hidden. And that's what's beautiful about connection. And so I'd say, like, yeah, just like what we're doing when we go out to the parlors
Mhm.
and like making those connections with like the homeless in the community, it's like creating those connections where they can see, like, this is a connection that I can have that is stable, and they see almost into a world
Mm.
that seems unaccessible. But like through that connection, it almost makes like a narrow pathway for them to walk in. And I know those things, those in my story, even today, finding those little pathways to freedom is what's been like the gateway to who I am now. Like, it has completely transformed my life.
It's beautiful. Anything you'd add, Jacob? Just something that you'd want people to know?
Yeah, I just don't be ashamed, and don't be afraid of your story.
Yeah.
I felt like one thing that the Lord told me, something that was in the past. I repented of it, and I did all the stuff, but I never told anyone about it. And I'm not saying you have to tell you every little detail of your life, but the Lord showed me that, oh, if I was ashamed to talk about it, then it still had power over me.
Wow.
And so I remember I actually learned, I got that in Love After Marriage.
Yeah.
And so I was like, it really was a revelation to me. It was like, oh, if I'm ashamed of it, then it still has power over me. I'm going to share it and not be afraid, because I'm going to trust the people who I'm sharing it with. And after I started doing that, I started realizing, like, oh, like, I'm free of that. I don't have to have that thing in my head constantly. Oh, but they don't know this one thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would just say, yeah, don't be afraid of your story. Don't be afraid to tell your story. And I also would just say that, yeah, to anybody who's trying to like reach anybody else in our situations that were in the past, in my situation, was that I was telling my wife this the other day, last night, we were talking about our meeting. And I was like, I have these moments of people who had good intentions, and I remember them, but I was living a lifestyle of something. So even though these moments had somewhat of an impact, there were just moments in my life. And until I had like intentional people giving me the most valuable thing that they had to give me was their time consistently, like then my life started really making a change. And so I would just say, like, don't give up on people. Don't give people your time, give people your devotion. If you want to see change, like that's what it's going to take.
It's good. It's really good. Yeah. I just love the hope inside this conversation. There's just so much hope. The reality of transformation's real, but it is interesting. Like the theme of connection, others, like being connected to others, like the journey is very much about our connection to others. And yeah, you guys just sharing a lot of wisdom, a lot of nuggets. Really appreciate you guys taking time to crack it open like this with us. I don't know if you guys want to mention your guys' social media, if people want to connect with you further. You don't have to by any means, but if you want to, you can share that right now. Faith?
Yeah, I'm not really on social media, so.
Okay, that's good. No need. Faith, do you want to share any of your social media if people want to reach out?
Yeah, I'd love to. On Facebook, it's just Faith Jenkins. And then I also have Instagram, and that's faith.jenkins. And then
Great.
and you can contact me through both of those. I have Facebook Messenger, and you can find me on probably about everything. But yeah, I'd love to chat.
That's good. Yeah. Well, again, thank you guys. Really, really good stuff. I appreciate you sharing your journeys with us. A lot of hope coming from the two of you. I feel super excited about being a dad and a husband after talking to you guys. So yeah, with that, we'll just say adios, peace.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jacob. Thank you, Faith.
Thank you.
And we will see you guys very soon.
Okay. Thank you, Bennett.